Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, December 4th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, we've got some news out of Southern California. Yesterday, Wednesday, a guy named Ted Kerner, whose house was destroyed in last year's wildfires, moved back into his rebuilt residence. KTLA Channel 5 in Los Angeles reported it this way. They said Kerner and his golden retriever Daisy May have been preparing for this moment, which county leaders are calling a significant step forward in the community's long recovery. Meanwhile, the LA City Council voted on Tuesday to delay a decision that would have waived reconstruction fees. This throws another roadblock into any other rebuilding in the area. That left some citizens in tears. Jessica Rogers, the president of the Pacific Palisades Resident Association, said, quote, "It is devastating to see how incompetent our city really is." So, Tom, almost a year after the fires, one house rebuilt so far. There are about 7,000 buildings burned, so you can do the math. At this rate, complete restoration is about the year 27-25. What do you make of what's going on in California?
It's freaking outrageous that it's been almost a year and they have rebuilt one home. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it was almost when I saw the story, I was like, that can't be right.
Right.
Can't be true.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah, but it is true. And the fact that that there isn't more attention paid to this nationally, that Karen Bass and, by the way, Gavin Newsom, right, aren't being held to account for this. I mean, you got Spencer Pratt out there. He's making noise and has become sort of the lone voice that's agitating about this. But beyond that, the media just picked up and moved on. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is, and you think about this is what government exists for. When you're an executive, whether it's at the local level or the state level, right? And you think about Ron DeSantis and what he did rebuilding after devastating hurricanes. I mean, he did a fantastic job of executing plans to rebuild. I mean, he rebuilt like a bridge in like 3 days, right? Not him personally, but he orchestrated it. And Gavin Newsom's off giving interviews to, Aaron Ross Sorkin at in New York City. He's running for president. He's doing all this stuff. What about going home and helping clear away all of the regulations and the crap to get these people to be able to rebuild their homes and move back into the neighborhood that they loved and lived in for many of these people was most of their lives. And it's an unbelievably tragic story, and it doesn't get more attention.
Carl?
I'd like to defend my home state here, but I don't know how to do it. This was in Altadena. That's in the county. The Palisades story is much worse. It's that no homes have been rebuilt there. The city council this week, people came. The proposal, the mayor Karen Bass, she never followed through on it. She initially said we'll waive construction fees, permitting fees for the Palisades. Now, there's a lot of other problems, but that's just a symbol of what's going on. These fees range between $4,000 and $10,000, and the city council is saying, well, this is going to cost us $86 million, or between 86 and $286 million. Well, it's actually not costing them anything. If the neighborhood hadn't, half the city, if the Palisades hadn't burned to the ground, they wouldn't be collecting these fees. And that's sort of the mindset of a modern Democrat. The money that we might get by that is ours. That even in the case of a fire. And so there was a council meeting, and 100 people came. They allowed conversation for 1 hour, just cut it off. People drove, because they're not able to live in Los Angeles anymore. They drove 2.5 hours. Were not allowed to speak. Waited for hours. Couldn't speak. And this, to me, it's just a symbol of broken governance of some of these cities, in this case, Los Angeles. And I looked it up, you guys. I don't know if you know anything about this, but Tom might, because he's from the Pacific Northwest. But after Pearl Harbor was bombed in the spring of 1942, Franklin Roosevelt, the president, thought that there should be a highway connecting the mainland to Alaska. It's still there. It's called the Alcan Highway. and the Army Corps, and it was just at the wilderness in the most forbidding landscape in North America. And they built 1,500 miles of roads through rivers that had no bridges, dense forest. The Army Corps of Engineers did it in 8 months. That's what they did. 1,500 miles of road in eight
Yeah,
months.
but Carl,
That's what happens.
You're not thinking about the environmental degradation that happened because of that. Come on.
This does bring up a good.
My point is, Americans can do this if government either should lead or follow or get out of the way. And in this case, it seems to me like the local city council. It seems like the city of Los Angeles is in the way. Americans can rebuild. They know how to do it. They've done it before, and this is it's just depressing.
Most of the coverage of the California governor's race is focused on, Katie Porter and her personality and all that. But this would seem to be a very ripe issue for that race. And in particular for Steve Hilton, who's the Republican who's running there. He's a former Fox News host and was part of the British cabinet at one point. And Steve's been out there for a long time. And, just focusing on this issue alone could win you tens of thousands of votes in Los Angeles County. I mean, the idea that Democrats are, I don't understand why this is, and maybe it is, maybe I just haven't been paying enough attention to that race, that it's
getting coverage in Los Angeles.
That it's would be a singular issue. And for, particularly, as Carl said, it might be a tougher one for the Democrats to handle because they're running the government there on all levels, all the way through the state legislature, supermajorities, and Gavin Newsom's in power and all that. But I would think that Steve Hilton would be able to leverage this in a pretty significant way, because it is just outrageous that they are so far behind in getting these people the ability to rebuild their homes.
I know. To that point, there was this theory. I remember people talking about it at the time, right after the fires, where people anticipated that the rebuilding would be very tough. And the theory was that this would help turn these California residents into
Republicans,
if not Republicans, at least libertarians. That they would think, oh my
right.
gosh, there's too much regulation. Carl, any
but Andy,
evidence that might be happening?
Well, yeah, I don't know about that, but you reminded me, Andy. Both Gavin Newsom and the mayor Karen Bass said that they wouldn't be bogged down in red tape. They kind of vowed to do it differently this time. And actually, the rebuilding from this fire is slower than previous fires. So, and this is not all the city's fault. You've got to get plans. People have to come up with the money. The insurance companies have to pay. I don't mean to lay it all on the city council, but Tom makes an interesting point, Andy, which is that it seemed like an opportunity for Governor Newsom to use the bully pulpit, throw his weight around, and these are his fellow Democrats, and sort of nudge them in the right direction, or to come up with legislation to do more than he's done on this. The Democrats are so busy fighting Donald Trump on everything, and I don't blame them. Gavin Newsom and the Democratic hierarchy in California, they're on safe ground in their state about siding against ICE and siding, with immigrants. That doesn't hurt them politically, and they would make a case that morally it's where they want to be. But it's not the only issue in the world. And if you're going to fight Trump on everything, then you don't ask for his help. The federal government could be helpful. You don't concentrate on other things. You don't really do the job. And it suggests to me that these Democrats have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time.
It occurred to me that this is another situation where Trump could absolutely just barnstorm and troll the Democrats. He should send in the National Guard, send in the Army Corps of Engineers, and start rebuilding that thing himself. He's a builder.
Like the Alcan,
yeah. Just clear that crap away and start, What are they going to do? Like Eric Swalwell is going to go out there and be like, "Get out of here, Trump! Stop building homes in, Pacific Palisades. How dare you, you fascist!"
Yeah, but you know what, guys? Donald Trump doesn't have a great record in these disasters either. And I remember the first term when Puerto Rico was devastated, a 1-2 punch of these hurricanes. And the place was just desperate. My son and his family lived there at the time, and he goes there and he manages to get in a squabble with the mayor and tosses a roll of paper towels at her, not to hurt her, but sort of you're going to catch this. I don't remember it, but the point is that Trump could have done what Tom's talking about then too. He's not done that. And it's typically a governor's responsibility. I think this is one reason why Ron DeSantis is still so popular. But I agree with you, Tom. He could do this, but
In Trump's defense,
he hasn't used the federal power that way in previous disasters.
in Trump's defense, he did rush an experimental vaccine to market and helped jab hundreds of millions of people with it.
But
He doesn't talk about that anymore, but
He doesn't. He's not sure how he feels about that. But Carl, you make an interesting point though that this is actually I saw this taking longer to rebuild than other similar fires. And I guess there's this practical aspect to this, which is the insurance company will pay for your rent for a certain 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, depending on your policy, but it's not forever. So there are people who, if they don't start rebuilding soon, are going to not have the resources to rebuild ever, I guess, and will have to sell the lots or do something else. But there's a real practical aspect to this for these residents that when you hear that they're in tears, I understand why.
Yeah, well, in housing in California, it's been a crunch. I mean, since the 70s. There's more people. There's just not enough housing in the state. There's all these, NIMBY traditions and government barriers to building up. The Palisades is these mostly, 1 or 2 story homes. I'm not saying it's a simple thing. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not as simple as carving through a forest to build a highway because, all these, they have different building codes. They've got to get the water and sewer in there, the electricity. Then there becomes the question: do you want to require these homes to have tile fire resistant roofs? They didn't before. That wouldn't have saved the thing in the Palisades fire, but that was a 1 in 100-year fire. There's a lot of stuff to do.
I think you're being too generous, Carl.
Right.
Well, no, I there was a but coming. I still don't. I don't pretend it's simple, but you just get the feeling that the government, that these elected officials who should care passionately about this, are have the wrong priorities. Imagine telling us, well, if we don't waive the building fees, it costs the government $86 million. How could you even say that with a straight face? It wasn't. If the fire hadn't come, you wouldn't have gotten any of that money. It's not even it's kind of a goofy point to even raise, and yet they postponed a vote. They still haven't voted on it yet, whether to waive these fees. The mayor announced it 10 months ago. They still haven't done it. So I'm as disgusted as you are, Tom.
So does the governor blame the mayor and the mayor blames the city council? Is that where the buck stops? I mean,
Tom blames all of them, all the Democrats.
I think Tom may be right.
Thank you. We're having a good day at RCP. Everyone's agreeing with Tom.
I just think it's hard for the governor to blame this on the mayor and wash his hands of it.
I don't know that he's done that. Yeah.
Well, he doesn't seem to be getting involved, Carl.
Yeah. Well, Tom's right. He's busy running for president. You can't do everything.
All right. Well, since we're all going to agree with Tom, that's no fun. Let's talk about something else. There's this new poll came out from KFF. It's about these healthcare subsidies. Shows that about half the people covered by Obamacare say an increase in their premiums would have a, quote, major impact on how or whether they vote in the midterms. So, Carl, this compromise vote that we're supposed to be getting from the Democrats doesn't look like it's going to pass in the Senate. Would require 60 votes to do so. Is this good or bad news for the Republicans? Because we may be looking at another government shutdown.
It doesn't even look like the Democrats have a plan yet. So, I mean, other than what Schumer said, well, no, we just want to extend Obamacare, the emergency Obamacare subsidies enacted during COVID. We just want them to be a permanent part of the feature. And of course, when you just say we're going to keep those, it's going to ever escalate. The cost is going to keep going up. All of it borrowed money, of course. The Republicans don't seem to haven't coalesced around a compromise plan. They are talking about other things. They're talking about the fraud that is endemic in this program. I mean, in other words, that poll, I wonder, it'd be nice to poll the fraudsters. Okay, you said you had health care more than 365 days last year. Would you vote Democrat if the program's brought into compliance? And the answer, do I already vote Democrat? But uh, this thing, to be able to negotiate it with the government shutdown, that's the gun to their head. This is why, and Andy, you and I sound like, good government people from another era. But remember when the budget committee would get together, all the committees that all had jurisdiction over different aspects of the budget would pass a budget. The Democrats and Republicans would vote on it committee, go to the full House, you'd have a budget. If there were differences, it would go to a joint House conference committee. They would iron out the differences. That's not what we do now.
That was a long time ago.
Now we just, I told you guys once, I talked to a member of Congress. I won't embarrass him by mentioning him. He'd been there a couple of years. He didn't know what a House Senate Conference Committee was.
Right.
So why would he? They don't do it that way anymore. So, but look, Tom and I have, we had a difference of opinion on this. I thought maybe you were going to get a vote, and maybe there was even a chance for a compromise. Tom laughed at me. You seconded his guffaw, as I recall, Andy. But I'm still.
Did we bet wine on that?
We did not bet wine on that, but we have our pride at stake, and mine's going to take it doesn't look good for my side, Andy. I continue to hold out hope that they'll rise to the occasion. But for the reason you cited, the Democrats seem to want it as an issue, and it seems to be an issue that may be cut in their favor going into the midterms.
So is Tom, and just for the record, I think you chortled. You didn't
chortled. That's right.
But the Republicans must be a little worried when they see polls like this. I mean, the Democrats are looking to hang this around the neck of the Republicans, and these insurance premiums are going to go up. And the president, at one point, was looking to extend them for 2 years, I believe, was sort of the balloon that was floated out of the White House. That doesn't look plausible at this point. So without a compromise, is this a net loss for the Republicans?
It could be. I mean, obviously, healthcare is when you look at the polling, the economy, inflation are number 1 and 2, but healthcare is right in there. I mean, it's top 5 for sure. In some cases, it's third, depending on the poll that you look at. And Democrats have an advantage on healthcare. They have for a long time. And it's one of their better issues in terms of voters thinking that they do a better job of handling it, that they're more attuned to their needs and wants when it comes to healthcare. And this would fit perfectly into those perceptions. Mm-hmm. And so I think it could be a potent issue for Democrats. And as Carl mentioned, this report that came out showing the fraud is that it was, quote unquote, teeming with fraud, right? These Obamacare tax subsidies. That complicates things a little bit, especially as you look at the story of the Somali fraud that's going on in Minneapolis, and this idea that taxpayers are being scammed by these programs. That is an issue that I think Republicans that could help mitigate things for Republicans a little bit if they can really drive that home and say, listen, we're not just going to be shoveling taxpayer money out the door when 30% of it is going to dead people and fraudulent claims and all of that. I think voters understand that, and maybe they still want their subsidies, of course, but Tom, they don't want fraud.
Tom, it might be the worst of both worlds for Republicans, which is this report makes it very difficult for a fiscally prudent Republican to vote just to throw these billions of dollars at this program that's rife with fraud. On the other hand, if the legacy media isn't writing about it, these swing voters and Democrats don't even know about it. So you make it hard for Republicans to vote for it, but they don't get a reward for the voters for standing up because the voters don't really know about the problems with the program.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. When we come back, Rachel Hoff from the Ronald Reagan Institute is going to be here talking about a new poll. So don't go away. We'll be back after this. Did you know that high blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for mortality? And with the holiday season upon us, you're about to spend precious time with people you love who may be at risk. The holidays can mean political debates around the dining room table, which we at Real Clear Politics are all for as long as they are civil. But along with the stress of travel and big meals, it's all a recipe for high blood pressure. That's why this is the perfect moment for 120 Life, a great tasting, functional drink made with ingredients that help support healthy blood pressure. Go to 120life.com. That's 120life.com. Use our code RCP. You'll get 20% off. Try it risk-free for 2 weeks, and if your blood pressure doesn't come down, you get a full refund. Nothing to lose except your high blood pressure numbers. Use code RCP for 20% off your order today. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. We're now joined by Rachel Hoff. She is the policy director at the Ronald Reagan Institute. And like me, she studied political science at Tufts University. So go Jumbos. Rachel, welcome
Go Jumbos.
to Real Clear Politics. So there's this new poll on American attitudes towards the U.S. foreign policy. It's from the Reagan Institute. Our own Jonathan Drager has written about it. He summed it up this way. He said, quote, Hegseth's plan to refocus Army near home is popular, but the appetite for intervention persists. So that's his take. What's your top line takeaway from these new poll numbers?
Well, I don't know if I'd use the word intervention. It's not a word that we use in the poll when we go to the American people to survey their attitudes. We also don't use words like isolationist. We use words that describe in practical terms to the American people what they want America's role in the world to be. And the words that resonate with them are words like leadership and engagement and military strength. And that, I think, is the biggest takeaway from the poll this year. The record high number of Americans, now up to 2/3 of Americans in our polling, want America to lead on the global stage, and they want it to do so from a position of military strength.
Rachel, one of the things that the poll showed and has continued to show for a few years is that China is seen as our greatest competitor / enemy, frenemy, whatever we're going to call them. But yet, the news for months and months now has been about the Middle East. It's been about Ukraine, and now it's been about South America, Venezuela, Argentina, Honduras. Is the government paying enough attention to China? Because this does seem, the public seems to have most concern about what China is doing, particularly with rare earth minerals and the like.
Yeah, we have a number of different ways that we try to get after this in our polling. The baseline question is, which country poses the greatest threat to the United States? Year over year for the last 5 years, that's been China. Russia's a distant second on that list. Although notably, when we started our polling in 2018, Russia was at the top of that list. So Tom, as you point out, China's the clearest threat. Americans are really clear-eyed about that. But they see global interests and priorities for the United States. They when we ask them sort of in a different question how they want to allocate U.S. military resources around the world, it's a kind of an even split between Indo-Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East. There's in other questions in the poll, as you point out, Tom, a real emphasis on focusing more on the Western Hemisphere, on problems here closer to home. And so my analysis for policymakers and leaders that are thinking about these issues is simply the American people understand that America has global interests and priorities. They want a military that's postured and resourced to deal with those threats. And they want to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, which is to say nothing of other questions in the poll where we ask specifically about foreign policy priorities versus priorities focusing on problems here at home. And the bottom line is the American people want us to be able to do both.
Rachel, you work at the Ronald Reagan Institute, and so I'm thinking of Reagan as I ask you this question, and as I read the poll, the Republican Party has been taken over by Donald Trump, who it'd be too pat to say he's an isolationist because he bombed Iran. He's trying to negotiate a peace between Ukraine and Russia, and Lord knows what he's doing in Venezuela. But there's this strain in the MAGA world, in Trump's base, that is very isolationist, and to the point where they didn't even want to support Israel. But I'm looking at this poll, and it seems to me that the electorate is not much different than it was when Reagan was president. They still want America to be very active on the world stage, even militarily. So am I right about that? If not, enlighten me.
No, that's exactly right, Carl. The data from our poll shows that there really is huge daylight between what we hear about MAGA from certain, not all, but certain voices within the MAGA movement and where MAGA voters are. Simply put, MAGA voters are not isolationist. They don't want America to do less in the world. They believe in American military strength. They believe in America's global engagement and in our leadership on the world stage. And President Trump, I think, had a really important moment this summer in that debate between certain voices in the MAGA movement, maybe a vocal minority, it's safe to say, and what he was doing in Iran, in Ukraine, et cetera, where he said, look, America First and MAGA, simply put, are not isolationist movements. And our data back that up. That question that we talked about earlier, that 2/3 of Americans want the US to lead and be more engaged in international affairs, that number among MAGA Republicans is nearly 80%.
Wow, that's amazing. Let me ask you this. I mean, today, this morning, as we're on the radio, Admiral Mitch Bradley is giving a classified briefing up on the Hill about this double tap. I guess that's the word we're using it for now. That's a great euphemism. Strike in the Caribbean against alleged Venezuelan drug boat. What do your polls tell us? What did the polls tell us, if anything, about Americans' attitudes towards Venezuela and towards using military assets in this way against drug runners?
Let me clarify first that our poll came out of the field in early November. So it was before the latest swath of headlines in terms of what we're seeing on Capitol Hill play out today. But certainly this conversation around military strikes against drug boats, the emerging conversation on Venezuela were very active at the time when we were in the field. The poll shows that the American people perceive Venezuela as an adversary. We have a specific question about support for use of military force against drug traffickers in Latin America. It's around 60% of Americans that support that use of military force. But whereas in other questions in our poll, there's huge bipartisan backing for that majority support, this is one where there's real partisan division. A large majority of Republicans support using military action against drug traffickers, but that number among Democrats is down near 1/3.
Rachel, there's a component of this poll where we talk about Carl's favorite subject, which is AI, and integrating that into the military. Carl's convinced that AI is going to be, Skynet's coming, and
it's the end of the human race.
Rachel. But you asked a series of questions about AI and sort of talking about, you asked just sort of a blanket question about AI and then a couple of follow-up questions. Tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about where the American public is on the issue of AI in the military.
So being the Reagan National Defense Forum, we are particularly focused on that piece, on that AI and the military. And we did ask broadly about AI's military applications. And really, there's kind of mixed views among the American people. Over time, we've seen a greater number of Americans come around to say that they're comfortable with military applications of artificial intelligence. So when we started polling a couple of years ago on AI and the military. But two interesting takeaways on our AI data in particular. Number one, when you put it in the context of the potential of AI to offer the United States a strategic advantage over China, support for AI in military contexts boosts. Similarly, when you put some caveats around it, around safeguards, keeping humans in the loop for any questions involving lethality, you see those numbers boost as well. And so I think Americans are still kind of figuring out what they think about AI in military context, but those key takeaways that it can offer a strategic advantage and we need to keep ethical considerations front and center along with safeguards are really kind of key, I think, to shaping how Americans view AI in the military context.
Well,
Carl, you want to go ahead? No,
I was just going to say, so, Rachel, I wonder how much people have thought about AI. These guys tease me about it, but I really do. I mean, every serious, science fiction writer who ever wrote about it for the last 100 years, when we talked about robots with super intelligence and the ability to to become sentient and do their own reasoning, eventually come to the place that, even if they're programmed to protect human beings, the threat to human beings is other human beings. So they just decide to either kill us off or enslave us and run the world themselves. But I think that's a serious proposition, but it seems like AI has just been accepted by everyone because it's here. And the rationale that we're told is that, well, we have to do it because China's doing it. Is that, then this is a little beyond the scope of your poll, but is that your view too?
Well, Carl, you need your own spin-off podcast on AI and killer robots, it sounds like. But I do think there's an element to this question of competition and in particular superiority. Another sort of AI question that we have in the poll is specifically US v. China. We not just AI, but conventional military capabilities, economic interests. We say who has superiority here, US or China? Military capabilities, economic power. And when we ask on AI, it's an even 1/3 split. 1/3 of Americans believe that US has superiority over China. 1/3 of Americans believe China has superiority over the US on AI. And 1/3 of Americans think we're at parity with China on AI. And so I do think there's something to kind of the ways that Americans are wrestling with these issues. And I think that can inform how national security leaders are thinking about it, particularly in terms of, American innovation on AI does not exist in a vacuum. We can see what our competitors in China are doing, what they're aiming for, and we have to decide if we want to compete.
Yeah. We're talking to Rachel Hoff. She is the policy director of the Ronald Reagan Institute. And we're talking about this poll. And one of the great things about this poll is you've done it for a number of years, I guess. So you can sort of get some sort of linear insight into people's attitudes. And one thing that struck me was that NATO has actually increased in favorability over the 7 years that you've been doing the poll. 68% in the latest questionnaire have a favorable view of NATO. That's up from 59% in 2018. And likewise, Ukraine is viewed as a stronger ally today than in some of the recent polls. So I'm wondering about that. What does that tell us about what our policy should be in Ukraine? And do you think the American people are seeing something that maybe the administration is not?
Well, both of those numbers on Ukraine and NATO that you've pointed out are heading in the upward direction, haven't done so consistently over time. NATO favorability, for example, you mentioned, Andy, was 60% when we started polling in 2018. It stood about 60% until this summer. In our latest Reagan Institute summer survey, NATO favorability was around 60%. Then it jumped to 68. Now, 8 points is significant in a poll, and so we wanted to understand what was going on there. And I think when it comes to the president's leadership at the NATO summit, looking back to the summer in The Hague, when it comes to his meeting with Secretary General Rutte, when it comes to the allies' commitments to increase defense spending, we can see that those seem to be making a difference in terms of overall support for NATO. And that upward shift, I'll note, is particularly driven by more support among Republicans. And so some of those things, especially I think on burden sharing and on the president's participation in the NATO summit, are really making a difference with Republicans in particular. And just briefly on NATO, I mean, briefly on Ukraine, we have a number of questions in the poll that look at not just US support for Ukraine, which is increasing, but also the negotiations to end the war. The clear preference when we offer people a couple of options about how the war might end, the clear preference among the American people is for full territorial sovereignty by a margin of 20 points over those that prefer that Ukraine give territorial concessions in exchange for security guarantees and a ceasefire. And so that's, I think, what I would really make sure, or what we're trying to make sure that leaders in the administration and in Congress understand when it comes to what the peace deals that they're trying to broker in the region. The American people are pretty clear-eyed about who our friends and who our enemies are in that war, and they want to see Ukraine prevail with full territorial sovereignty.
Can I get the last question?
Yes, you may.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. I always like having the last word. But Rachel, so you're going to get the last word. But, Taiwan is always an issue that is lurking out there with China. We talked about China earlier, but what does the poll show about American support for Taiwan and how far we're willing to go to help Taiwan defend itself?
So we added a new question this year, Tom, that's just, is it important that the US military defend Taiwan? 3 in 4 Americans say yes. We have that trend line data we were talking about earlier. We can go back and see how things are shifting. And there's big shifts when it comes to US support for Taiwan as well. We poll test a variety of US responses to a Taiwan contingency in case of Chinese invasion, everything from economic sanctions to recognizing Taiwanese independence, to establishing a no-fly zone, shooting down Chinese warplanes, and indeed even US troops on the ground in Taiwan. Across each of those responses to a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, just in the last year, support has gone up 10 points. So I think the American people are really starting to understand, and this is reflecting, I think, where the national security conversation in Washington is going. American people really seem to be more and more understanding the threat that China poses in the region and the importance of Taiwan as a democracy because of its strategic interests and because of the message it would send to the rest of the world if we don't act in defense of Taiwan.
Wow. Well, great stuff. Well, Rachel, thanks so much for being here, telling us about the poll. If you want to read more about the poll, go to RealClearPolitics. There's an article by Jonathan Drager there, and it will link you back to the poll itself and the crosstabs, and you can sort of get more information on this. It's fascinating stuff. So, Rachel, again, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm here with Tom and Carl, and we're going to take a break. But before we go, I want to tell you something and listen to this. We're all looking for a way to make more money, but let's be honest, the idea of learning something new, taking on more risk, or working harder, nobody wants that these days. And that's where TrueTrade comes in. Their AI-driven technology enables you to generate income passively without risking your own capital, wasting your time, or needing years of experience. TrueTrade is institutional-grade software, the same type hedge funds and big banks use, but now it's available to everyday people like you and me. And here's the best part. They'll even guarantee your trading capital. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars that you can trade with, and I don't know about you, but that kind of funding could be life-changing. So if you're looking for a smarter way to make money, download their mobile app on Android or iOS, or go to TrueTrade.io right now. That's TrueTrade.io. Funding accounts are limited, so don't wait. Reserve your funding today and let technology earn for you. See terms to learn more. Guys, I want to talk about Charlie Kirk for a minute. Blake Neff, who is a producer at the Charlie Kirk Show over at Turning Point USA, used the program yesterday, that would be Wednesday, to hit back at Candace Owens, saying that by spreading conspiracy theories about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, Owens is harassing and causing real danger to Kirk's family and his associates. So here's a little bit of that podcast by Blake Neff.
Candace Owens has leveled a flood of allegations against people at Turning Point USA, people at Turning Point Action, and people who work for this show. She's made them against some of Charlie's closest friends and against some of his most dedicated employees. I could go on. There is always something new coming up, and none of it ever pans out because from the start, there has been nothing there. The attacks and allegations from Candace are either lies or they are innuendos thrown around with a total reckless disregard for the truth.
So, Tom, he went on to say that they've tried to ignore this for the past 2.5 years,
right.
2.5 months, I'm sorry, but felt they couldn't any longer. So what do you make of this? And for the record, Owens responded saying she's willing to participate in some sort of dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, well, they've set a date. They're going to do a live stream where Blake and Andrew Colvett and some of these other folks who are Charlie's, they're going to go through the Candace Owens, her accusations and claims, and they've invited her to participate either virtually or in person. She's accepted. So, I mean, this is going to be, bigger than Stranger Things, I think. People will be logging on to see this. I mean, Candace Owens has, for the past 2.5 months, made these just wild allegations, ridiculous claims about, it was a setup, that people within Turning Point were responsible for Kirk's assassination, that the Egyptian government is involved, Israel. I mean, all this like crazy shit that she's been sort of pumping out. She claims she's just asking questions, and she's just, just wants reasonable answers to the reasonable questions that she's been asking. And as you said, the folks at Turning Point have been basically just ignoring it for a while, but have gotten to the point now, I guess, where they decided that it's been so harmful to people have been harassed within the organization, family members, friends, and the like, that they decided they were going to address it. And so it's going to be, I think, must see TV or live stream or whatever on December 15th. I know I will be watching.
Yeah. Well, Carl, Candace Owens is a bomb thrower. She's a provocateur, conspiracy theorist.
He's barking mad.
She's barking mad. I think that's a fair. I will actually agree with Carl on that one. And I don't really follow her or care that much about what she says, but I guess the threats have become, and their inbox has been so chock full of this kind of, I guess, vile threats, sort of generated by what she's been saying, that they finally felt they had to respond.
Well, that statement that clip you played, a reckless disregard for the truth is it's legal language. It comes out of Times versus New York Sullivan, right? Malice, legal malice. If you libel or slander somebody who's a public figure, you can still be held accountable if you showed a reckless disregard for the truth. And when I heard that, I thought, well, they may, engaging her is one way. I don't know that would do any good. It seemed to me the thing to do, they were thinking about suing her. But another question arose in my mind is truth is a defense to libel, but is insanity a defense to libel? And I'm not trying to be facetious. She's just she's a conspiracy nut, and she just spins these tales. She doesn't care who she hurts, but maybe she's not lying. Maybe she really believes them. And so then, it would actually make an interesting, if it came to an interesting case law. President Trump has talked about, changing the libel laws, making it easier to sue people in this country.
It's the George Costanza defense.
Yeah.
It's not a lie if you believe it.
Exactly. And I think that may be the problem here.
Well, and she's already being sued by the Macrons over her obsession with proving that Brigitte Macron is not actually a woman, but a man. And I believe they hired a fairly prominent law firm here in the United States that is taking action against Candace Owens on that count. And I think I read somewhere that was kind of her defense, but I don't want to speak too much out of school because I haven't followed that case that closely.
Right. Well, since we're talking about Charlie Kirk,
but we should say, by the way,
right.
She does have a huge platform. I mean, she has millions and millions of people. She's one of the big. It's one of these things. Like, maybe we should do that on this podcast because we'd be huge if we just started, just asking questions about whether people are, doing things.
Carl asks questions about AI that if AI could sue, they might. That might happen.
They'll just blow up my house.
Right.
The robots, they won't sue.
But since we're talking about Charlie Kirk, there was this report from the Media Research Center. They did a poll. Tom, 24% of the respondents to the poll correctly described Tyler Robinson, who's the man accused of murdering Charlie Kirk, as left-wing. So 24% said left-wing, 22.3% said right-wing, 27.5% said they didn't know. What does that tell us about media coverage?
Well, it tells you that the Jimmy Kimmels of the world, who were out there trying to basically confuse the public and say that this was a MAGA guy, right? When there was substantial reporting to suggest that while he grew up in a MAGA family, that he had broken. It had developed his own sort of left-wing political beliefs and was apparently involved in a relationship with a guy who was a furry and all sorts of things like that, and really hated Charlie Kirk and hated what he said and thought he was a hate monger and all that stuff. So it just goes to show that the media's effort to muddy the waters on the political motivations of Tyler Robinson worked. I mean, you had 3/4 of people that either, had the wrong answer. Basically, they either thought he was a right winger or they didn't know. And I suspect that the 24% of people who did understand that he was, had these left-wing political views probably got their information from conservative media because they were the only ones who were actually telling the truth about this stuff.
Carl, you see it that way?
Well, I hesitate to talk about him as though he's already been convicted, but his family turned him in. So, let's for the sake of argument, say that he did it. Again, I don't know that he did it, but he grew up. The truth is usually so much more interesting and subtle than the labels that we put on and the hurling, the talking points hurled back and forth across the spectrum. He grew up in a Mormon household, LDS conservative family, and not a MAGA family, but a family that supported Donald Trump, that supported Republicans. Very healthy home. Played sports. From St. George, sort of picturesque, wonderful town, and they sent him out into the world, and he gets these ideas. Maybe he has a relationship with a man who's becoming trans. There's this, Tom mentioned this furry adjacent thing to it, which is so weird. I don't even know how to talk about it. But then he decides that Charlie Kirk is a menace, and he's going to kill Charlie. It's a political assassination, obviously from a person who objects to Charlie Kirk's Christianity and his conservatism. And it's not a trick question. He's not a right winger.
Right.
But the story of how these young people become radicalized one way or another is a story really about the effects of social media in our culture and the sort of one-sided nature of the college experience. And it's a very interesting and sad story, and tragic for this family, tragic for Charlie Kirk's family, obviously, but also tragic for his family. And you would hope that most Americans could form a more intelligent view of it. That poll just, it just asked these questions, so it doesn't get into all that. But I don't think we ought to go overboard and say, the liberalism or the Democratic Party or left-wing politics are to blame for this guy either, because added to all that is a clear mental health component. It's not a rational act to kill somebody like that. So
yeah. Hey,
Carl's letting the media off the hook once again.
Right. Hey, we just got a few minutes left, but I do want to mention this breaking news story, which is that they've made an arrest in this pipe bombing, and apparently, at least according to reports, it's someone with ties to Antifa.
Andy, it's the conservative wing at Antifa.
Let's not jump to conclusions.
Carl, what do we know, and what should we be thinking about?
Well, we don't know much, and we don't know. The problem with this story has always been we didn't know who did it. So pipe bombs are planted near the RNC and DNC on January 6th. It's used as a pretext to take this riot at the Capitol and make it. It was one of the reasons it became seen of by the Biden administration and the media and most of the country is not a riot, but an insurrection, a terrible thing trying to overthrow the government. These pipe bombs were always an element, but it was this great mystery. Who put them there? Was it a false flag operation? Was it a left winger? Was it a right winger? We didn't know. And the FBI didn't seem to have any clue. And, it's easy to criticize the FBI. I've done it myself, but you couldn't tell from the footage if it was a man or a woman. It was covered with a mask. The motivation seemed, the pipe bombs never went off. So we didn't know. But if it turns out it was an Antifa person, it's going to make a lot of what was said about it wrong, and should require some people in the media, Tom, and in law enforcement and the Democratic Party go back and look at some of the things they said about this and say, well, maybe next time I won't be so hasty to.
Oh, please. They're not going to do
that. Tom, no hope, huh?
Well, no hope for accountability in the media, no, or reflection or any of that stuff. But I am interested to see how this plays out, and when the FBI will get more details, and certainly I think folks in the conservative media, Julie Kelly's been following this, Susan Crabtree has been following it. So we'll learn more, and it'll be interesting to see exactly who did this.
Yeah.
and why.
All right. Well, that's our program for today. I want to thank you guys. If you're listening on the podcast apps or watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, like, send us a comment. I'm Andrew Walworth. I want to thank our producers. On behalf of Carl, Tom, and everyone here at RCP, thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow.